On a festive afternoon, the townspeople gathered to watch Lord Cyrus and Lady Grace walk gracefully through the streets, admiring how perfectly they seemed to suit each other. Many whispered that they looked like a painting come to life, yet their praise soon shifted into gossip about Cyrus's former wife, Lady Raphilia, a woman without special abilities who had vanished 3 years earlier. People speculated that rumors of her affair had led to her disappearance, and remarked that once 3 years had passed, the divorce would be finalized. With barely half a year remaining, they confidently predicted that Cyrus would soon remarry Grace, insisting it would be for the best. Unnoticed in the crowd, a woman wearing a sun hat watched the couple with quiet relief. She reflected that, unlike in her previous life, the tragedies she once endured had not repeated. When her young son tugged at her dress and asked about the man in the distance, she calmly explained that he was Lord Cyrus and might one day become king. The child reacted with awe, while she silently reassured herself that both she and Cyrus were alive and that he had ended up with the person he was meant to be with. She believed she had finally escaped the painful destiny of her first life. However, her fragile peace shattered when Cyrus suddenly appeared before her and demanded to know whether she understood how desperately he had searched for her. Shocked and terrified, she tried to deny her identity and hide behind her laundry, wondering why he was still looking for her at all. She then recalled the misery of her first life. As a non-ability user, she had been shunned and isolated, enduring a hollow marriage to a husband who openly devoted himself to his beautiful mistress, Lady Grace. Her loneliness deepened the day she was prevented from entering a room, only to learn that Cyrus had suddenly died. Grace had been found mourning over his body, and an autopsy later revealed traces of poison from a rare herb. Because Raphilia possessed knowledge of plants, a noblewoman swiftly accused her of using the herb to murder her husband. With no one willing to defend her, she was framed as the culprit and executed. Facing death, Raphilia had reflected bitterly on her wasted life. She wished she had pursued her dream of opening a small-town apothecary and helping others instead of living in silent obedience. In her final moments, she longed to be reborn free and true to herself, someone capable of saving lives rather than being condemned. To her astonishment, she awakened during her wedding ceremony, realizing she had returned 2 years into the past. Cyrus was alive, and so was she, standing once again at the beginning of the same sequence of events. Everything unfolded exactly as before, leaving no doubt that she had been given another chance. On their wedding night, Cyrus entered their chamber and coldly explained that the marriage was merely political. He stated that he had married her for the royal family's international connections and influence, nothing more. He added that he had no interest in children and that they would live separate lives. After sharing a bed for appearances that night, they would sleep apart, and she would visit his room only once a week to maintain public image. His heart, he made clear, already belonged to Grace. As Raphilia listened, she recognized every word. She understood that she had truly returned to the restrained, obedient life she once endured. A dull and loveless marriage that had led to her downfall. Yet this time, armed with memory and regret, her second life had only just begun. Cyrus fixed Raphilia with a sharp stare and demanded to know whether she had been listening, pressing her for an answer. Realizing she had truly returned 2 years into the past, she told herself she must not waste this second chance. Inwardly, she resolved to prevent his future assassination and then seek a divorce, believing that if no one died, both of them could eventually find happiness. More than anything, she longed to secure her own freedom. Though his words were cold, she outwardly accepted the terms of their political marriage, reflecting that this arrangement had once led smoothly to her downfall. Determined to change fate, Raphilia began researching the poison that had killed Cyrus in her previous life. She remembered that the autopsy had identified belamist, a toxic herb. In her former life, her deep knowledge of plants had made her the perfect scapegoat when suspicion arose. Born into the wealthy rattle merchant family, she had grown up surrounded by rare medicinal herbs and books. Delighting in studying and compounding plants, that passion had ultimately been twisted into evidence against her. As she searched through botanical records, she confirmed that belamist belonged to a specific herb family. She then discovered a related plant, lyramist, which shared similar properties but was only a fraction as potent and commonly used as medicine for fatigue recovery and sleep. She cautiously wondered whether controlled exposure to lyramist might stimulate immunity against belamist, potentially saving Cyrus from poisoning. Her thoughts were interrupted when a maid informed her that Cyrus would not join her for dinner due to official duties. Raphilia politely requested that her meal be brought to her room. She reflected that, in time, even such notices had ceased in her previous life, leaving her to dine alone in silence. Seeking fresh air, she went for a walk in the garden, noticing the staff's judgmental stares. Unlike before, however, they no longer wounded her. She contemplated the vast social divide between herself, a non-ability user, and Cyrus, the second prince of Mystoria and an elite high-ranking ability user. In their society, people were divided into high-ranking ability users, ordinary ability users, and non-ability users, with status determined by innate power. For generations, royalty and nobility had preserved their dominance through carefully arranged marriages within powerful bloodlines. She had once foolishly hoped Cyrus might have married her out of affection, but his blunt declaration that their union was merely political, with no need for children, had shattered that illusion. He had wanted only her family's international connections. She recalled her parents' stern instructions to remain obedient and silent, reminding her how fortunate she was to marry such an outstanding man despite lacking abilities. She had followed their advice faithfully, enduring loneliness without complaint, only to be falsely accused and executed. Now, she silently asked for forgiveness for choosing a different path, vowing that her new resolve would not bring disgrace upon the Rydell family. During her walk, she encountered the Queen and Prince Elliot, the very figures who had orchestrated her ruin in her previous life. She greeted them formally, but the Queen feigned ignorance of her identity, despite having attended the wedding. Raphilia recognized this as a deliberate attempt to undermine her confidence, just as before. After introducing herself respectfully as Cyrus's new wife, she requested the Queen's favor. In response, the Queen ostentatiously used her magical ability to conjure a small, plain flower, presenting it as a mock apology. She remarked that such a simple bloom suited her perfectly before departing. Raphilia observed the Queen's blatant display of superiority and noted that Prince Elliot, who did not even return her greeting, remained entirely under his mother's influence. Raphilia stepped into the bright sunlight but quickly realized she had forgotten her hat. Deciding to retrieve it, she returned inside the palace and overheard two maids gossiping about the royal succession. They debated whether Lord Cyrus or Lord Elliot should become the next king, openly favoring Cyrus and criticizing Elliot's lack of charisma. Raphilia knew such talk was dangerous, especially given the fragile political climate. Officially, Elliot was the crown prince, yet rumors claimed the king intended to revise the law and pass the throne to Cyrus instead, fueling the Queen's growing hostility. Before Raphilia could withdraw, Cyrus suddenly appeared behind her and coldly demanded to know what was being whispered. Realizing how serious the matter was, he directly confronted the maids and declared that the castle had no place for idle chatter, ordering them to leave. The maids fled in tears. Although startled by his severity, Raphilia admitted to herself that his reaction was understandable given the stakes. Later, when she encountered the same maids again, she chose to intervene, firmly reprimanding them. She warned that spreading rumors about the royal family was deeply disrespectful and grounds for dismissal. She reminded them that one never knew who might be listening and insisted they uphold the dignity expected of palace staff. After extracting apologies, she felt relieved, knowing that by disciplining them herself she had likely spared them from harsher punishment by Cyrus. However, her satisfaction turned to embarrassment when she realized Cyrus had witnessed the entire exchange. Flustered, she made an excuse about her hat and retreated to her room. That evening, she dined alone, reflecting on how the palace atmosphere had grown tense since her outburst. Though she briefly wished for someone she could speak to freely, she reminded herself that she planned to divorce Cyrus and leave the castle eventually. Focusing on her strategy, she recalled that in her previous life she had been kidnapped about a year and a half into her marriage but safely rescued. This memory sparked a new idea. If she used that future incident as cover to stage a disappearance and remained missing for 3 years, the kingdom's laws would finalize her divorce automatically. At the same time, she remained determined to prevent Tyrus's assassination. She resolved to brew tea from lyramist, a herb related to the deadly bellamist but far less toxic, to gradually build his resistance while helping his fatigue. The only obstacle was that lyramist grew exclusively in the dangerous forest of silence. When she requested permission to gather it, Cyrus immediately refused, citing reports of monsters in the area. She attempted to explain that the herb would benefit his health and mentioned hearing that he enjoyed tea. At that moment, Lord Owen, the red-haired knight commander and Cyrus's childhood friend, intervened playfully and suggested allowing her to go. Since Cyrus was occupied with a state council meeting, Owen volunteered to escort her himself. In the forest, he observed her genuine passion for plants, and Raphilia realized she had never noticed how friendly he was in her previous life. She also remembered with sorrow that he had later died during a devastating epidemic that began like a mild cold but escalated into a fatal illness claiming hundreds of lives. Owen's use of fire magic to clear their path startled her back to the present. She remarked that she had never witnessed such abilities up close, nor had she ever seen Cyrus display his own powers. Owen casually revealed that Cyrus had endured a harsh childhood marked by curses and confinement. The revelation stunned Raphilia, confronting her with a side of Cyrus she had never known before. Owen asked Raphilia whether no one had told her about Cyrus's troubled past, but he quickly retracted his words and told her to forget what he had said, leaving her confused and unsettled. Before she could press further, she spotted the lyramist herb she had been searching for and rushed toward it with visible excitement. Owen watched her cheerful reaction and quietly thought that Cyrus was fortunate to have a wife so genuinely passionate and sincere. Later, Raphilia was invited to have tea in the royal greenhouse, an honor she had never experienced in her previous life when she could only admire it from afar. Overjoyed simply to be inside, she prepared lyramist tea for Cyrus, intending to begin building his immunity to the deadly bellamist poison. Cyrus, meanwhile, admitted to himself that he had chosen the greenhouse after Owen mentioned her love for plants, though he had not expected her to be so delighted. When he tasted the tea and found it refreshing and easy to drink, Raphilia saw it as the perfect first step in her quiet plan to protect him. Noticing the silence between them, she resolved not to repeat her former mistake of remaining obediently quiet. Gathering courage, she asked about the reported water pollution in the Western District. Drawing on knowledge from her previous life, she explained that untreated drainage from mining operations had contaminated the water supply. She knew that this pollution would later contribute to a devastating epidemic, the same outbreak that would claim Owen's life. Determined to prevent what she could, she urged attention to aging water systems and proactive reform. Cyrus was surprised by both her awareness and initiative but admitted that he had already been concerned about the issue. He agreed that water was fundamental to life and promised that plans for improvement should proceed immediately. He also remarked that she seemed unusually well informed and noted how calmly she had reacted to the maid's earlier gossip. Raphilia replied that she simply disliked spreading unverified rumors. Cyrus then revealed that the succession rumors were, in fact, true and asked whether the possibility of becoming queen troubled her. Though she privately intended to divorce him, she answered that she only wished for the country's prosperity. Her response struck him as philosophical and unlike any woman he had met before. For a brief moment, Raphilia reflected that perhaps, had she spoken so openly in her previous life, their marriage might have unfolded differently. However, the peaceful atmosphere shattered when Lady Grace arrived, apologizing for interrupting and requesting a private discussion with Cyrus. Raphilia observed that Grace moved freely within the greenhouse, a reminder of her special position. As Cyrus left with Grace, Raphilia watched them and reassured herself that they truly suited one another. According to her plan, they would eventually be united and she would step aside so everyone could find happiness. Sometime later, Raphilia found herself riding in a carriage with Cyrus, astonished that her suggestion about water pollution had led to an official inspection of the western region. When she asked whether it was truly acceptable for her to accompany him, he assured her there was no problem. Realizing that speaking up had made a tangible difference, she felt quietly fulfilled. When Cyrus noticed her staring and asked why, she simply replied that she was happy. As they arrived in the district to begin the inspection, Raphilia reflected that, for the first time, her actions were shaping a different future. Cyrus and Raphilia conducted a direct inspection of the contaminated water sources in the Western District, where the severity of the pollution quickly became evident. Cyrus observed that the damage extended far beyond daily inconvenience. It threatened public health, livestock, and agricultural production. Recognizing the long-term consequences, he declared that immediate countermeasures were essential. A local official expressed heartfelt gratitude, admitting surprise that the prince had personally come despite only submitting a formal request. Raphilia quietly felt reassured, knowing that resolving the water crisis would significantly reduce the spread and impact of the epidemic she remembered from her previous life. Afterward, Raphilia visited a local apothecary who had earlier shared concerns about the region's health conditions. She presented him with a rare medicinal herb possessing strong antibacterial properties, explaining that although it was not yet widely distributed, it had proven effective, carried no side effects, and was easy to cultivate. The apothecary hesitated to accept such a valuable gift, but she insisted and provided detailed preparation instructions. She reasoned that even if a future epidemic emerged, having this remedy available could save countless lives. As she left, she admitted to herself that she had exaggerated the herb's popularity abroad, but she justified the lie if it meant protecting the public. Remembering her father's imports and her lifelong devotion to botanical study, she resolved that this would be the final time she involved herself so deeply in research after marriage. Feeling she had done everything within her power, Raphilia returned to the carriage, grateful for Cyrus's swift action. Suddenly, a young boy broke through the crowd and lunged toward Cyrus. Guards immediately restrained him, but the child tearfully shouted accusations against the king, blaming heavy taxes and royal luxury for his family's suffering. He claimed his mother had worked herself to death and that his sister was now gravely ill. Raphilia feared Cyrus might respond harshly, yet he instead knelt before the boy and offered a sincere apology. He promised to convey the grievances directly to the king and work toward reforming the system. Both the surrounding citizens and Raphilia were stunned by his compassion. On the return journey, she noticed that Cyrus looked deeply saddened rather than angered. Attempting to ease the tense silence, she commented on the boy's courage but immediately regretted speaking. To her surprise, Cyrus confided that he had lost his own mother at a young age and understood the boy's pain. Raphilia recalled that his biological mother had died from illness, casting his earlier composure in a new light. When she noticed sand caught in his hair, she instinctively reached out to brush it away. Startled, he caught her wrist, and for a brief moment their eyes locked in unexpected closeness. Embarrassed, she quickly explained herself, and they returned to their seats. As they settled back into the carriage, Cyrus calmly reminded her that it was their scheduled weekly appearance night and asked her to come to his bedroom. Raphilia was left flustered and speechless. Later, they lay side by side in the same bed, fulfilling the obligation of their arranged marriage while maintaining a quiet, restrained distance between them. Raphilia lies awake beside Cyrus, struck by the familiarity of the moment. Once again, they are simply sleeping side by side. No intimacy, no warmth shared, just as in her first life. The repetition unsettles her. Worse still, she has forgotten her hot water bottle, and the cold bites deeply. She has always been sensitive to low temperatures. Sensing her restlessness, Cyrus quietly asks whether she cannot sleep. She denies it, then comments on the chill. He admits he hadn't noticed, explaining that he naturally runs warm. Envious of that warmth, Raphilia impulsively asks to borrow it. After a brief, embarrassed pause, she moves closer and presses her icy feet against his. His body heat soothes her far better than any heated bottle. Flustered but gentle, Cyrus tells her to do as she likes. Raphilia relaxes, openly expressing how comforting it feels. In the quiet, she thanks him for allowing her to accompany him on the inspection earlier that day. It had been meaningful to witness conditions firsthand. Cyrus replies that he too benefited from the visit and credits her suggestion for making it possible. Their conversation turns serious as Raphilia raises the unresolved waterworks issue. The mayor had submitted a formal request, yet it never reached Cyrus, only the minister. Though he had known of the problem, he admits he should have inspected the site sooner. Raphilia argues that officials must see conditions with their own eyes and listen directly to citizens instead of governing solely from behind desks. Her criticism is not aimed only at him but at the broader structure of national governance. Poverty, budget decisions, and public works are handled abstractly, detached from reality. Even the king's good intentions cannot prevent disaster if suffering is ignored. Such neglect could eventually spark unrest and threaten the throne itself. She acknowledges Cyrus's diligence, his regional inspections, and personal appeals to the king and ministers, but laments that final decisions are shaped by the voices surrounding the royal couple. The frustration, she admits, is unbearable. As she drifts to sleep, Cyrus watches her thoughtfully. He realizes she has been observing his efforts far more closely than he knew. Her earlier gesture of offering him herbal tea now makes sense. She had been trying to comfort him. Gently touching her hair, he reflects that she feels like a completely different person from the woman he met before their marriage meeting. The next morning, Raphilia admires the pleasant garden view until a commotion interrupts her peace. She discovers the queen berating a maid named Lydia for presenting vermilion flowers instead of the requested orange ones. Despite Lydia's desperate apologies, the queen coldly dismisses her, ordering her to leave the castle at once. Raphilia intervenes respectfully, explaining that the flowers are a rare variety that appear orange when freshly picked but deepen into red over time. They were likely correct when acquired. The queen curtly tells her not to interfere. As Lydia trembles, Raphilia notices a locket the maid has dropped. Inside is a photo of the boy from the Western District, a child Raphilia had encountered before. Realizing Lydia must be his older sister, who came to work at the castle to support him, Raphilia's resolve hardens. She asks the queen for permission to take Lydia as her own lady-in-waiting, explaining that although she has already been assigned 2 attendants, more than she feels she deserves, 1 would suffice. The queen dismissively tells her to do as she pleases and departs, leaving Lydia's fate in Raphilia's hands. Raphilia gently tells Lydia that she adores the disputed flowers and asks her to display them in her room. The simple act of appreciation moves Lydia to tears, her gratitude overflowing at being shown kindness instead of scorn. Later, while Raphilia reads in her chambers, Lydia gathers the courage to ask why she helped her. Raphilia answers plainly that even a queen can act unreasonably and that the dismissal had been entirely unfair. Lydia admits she had thought Raphilia a distant and reserved noblewoman, surprised by her candor. Reflecting quietly, Raphilia realizes the accusation that Lydia lacked warmth was never true. The maid's sincerity and vulnerability reveal a deeply caring heart. Encouraged, Lydia shares her past. After her mother died in a rural village in the west, she came to work at the castle to support her younger brother. Since that loss, she confesses she has not been able to smile properly. Raphilia's earlier suspicion is confirmed. Lydia is indeed the sister of the boy from the Western District. Taking her hands, Raphilia offers quiet comfort, acknowledging the hardship she must have endured. Then Lydia leans closer with a grave warning Raphilia must be extremely cautious of Queen Adelaide. Because of the ongoing succession dispute, the queen has often spoken ill of both Cyrus and Raphilia. The implication is clear. To secure the throne for her own son Prince Elliot, Cyrus stands in her way. The realization unsettles Raphilia. If she were to bear an heir, she would move closer to the line of succession, though that possibility has already been dismissed. Still, the queen's hostility suddenly feels more dangerous than petty court politics. A chilling thought surfaces from the shadows of her past life. What if the queen herself poisoned Cyrus? If the plan was to eliminate him, frame Raphilia as the culprit, and have her executed, then the tragedy of her previous life was no accident. Piece by piece, the puzzle aligns. The malice, the rumors, the outcome, everything fits. Raphilia approaches Cyrus's office, carrying a tray of herbal tea. Finding the door slightly open, she peeks inside and sees him asleep at his desk, head propped against his hand amid towering stacks of paperwork. His peaceful expression softens her heart. Deciding not to wake him, she reflects that he truly needs to care for his health and resolves to leave the tea with a note instead. Borrowing a pen, she writes a short message thanking him for his hard work and urging him to drink the tea and look after himself. Signing it, Rafi. As she sets the note down, her gaze drifts over the documents spread across his desk. She recognizes detailed plans for Western waterworks improvements, financial reforms to support impoverished citizens, and proposals for on-site inspections. The papers confirm that Cyrus has been earnestly organizing reforms for the nation, just as they had discussed. Yet the sheer volume of work only heightens her worry that he is pushing himself too far. Cyrus suddenly wakes to find her leaning over his desk and startles at her presence. She apologizes, explaining she only meant to leave tea. He accepts it with a small cough, appearing fatigued. Seizing the moment, Raphilia shyly offers to help with his workload, mentioning her experience managing accounts at her family estate. Before he can properly answer, Lord Owen barges in without knocking, announcing he has come to hang out. He cheerfully thanks Raphilia for their recent outing, teasingly calling it a date. Cyrus responds with a cold, silent stare while calmly sipping his tea. Undeterred, Raphilia presses her request to assist with simple clerical tasks. Cyrus initially refuses, insisting he can manage alone, but she protests that she is bored and wants to be useful. Owen laughs at Cyrus's stubbornness and persuades him to assign her at least one task. Reluctantly, Cyrus hands her a heavy box of reports from the Night Order's Black Forest expedition. With funds running low, he needs to reorganize the expenses and revise the budget, work usually handled by Owen. Sitting on the sofa, Raphilia immediately begins calculating with an abacus, its rhythmic clicks echoing through the room. In just an hour, she announces she is finished. Both men are stunned. She presents a neatly organized breakdown sorted by unit, squad, dates, and purpose, even drafting a reusable template to streamline future reports. She highlights inconsistencies, including missing medical supply quantities and a suspicious restaurant stamp on an Archer unit requisition. Owen is deeply impressed, noting that she has uncovered internal irregularities within the order. Cyrus thanks her sincerely and asks her to continue assisting him, which she happily agrees to do. When Owen attempts to linger, Cyrus coolly dismisses him and sends him back to work. Alone, he tells Raphilia he will prepare more assignments for her starting the next day. As she rises to leave, he reminds her that it is their scheduled, shared sleep day. Flustered but composed, she agrees to come later that night. After she departs, Cyrus remains seated, staring thoughtfully at the note she left behind. That evening, they lie together beneath the dim glow of a single candle. Cyrus asks if her feet are cold, but she says she is fine. Soon, however, she notices that he is shivering. When she touches him, she is startled by how cold he feels. Cyrus admits the fireplace is under repair and he likely caught a chill after his bath. Seeing him visibly trembling, Raphilia looks at him with deep concern. Raphilia lies awake beside Cyrus, alarmed by the unnatural coldness of his body. As he shivers, she wonders helplessly what she should do. Cyrus apologizes softly and asks her to turn around. When she does, he pulls her tightly against him from behind, murmuring that she is warm. The gesture unsettles her. This is nothing like the previous night when only his feet had been cold. Now his entire body feels frozen. A creeping fear takes hold. Could he be ill? Cyrus insists that if they remain like this, he will warm up soon. Without warning, he is seized by sudden agony. Raphilia turns to see him clutching his shoulder, his face contorted in pain. As his shirt slips, she notices a strange bruise glowing blue, violet on his skin, unlike any mark she has ever seen. Panic surges through her. She asks if he is alright, but Cyrus, drenched in sweat and struggling to breathe, dismisses it as something common and orders her to leave. She refuses, protesting that she cannot abandon him when he constantly overworks himself. She begs him to rely on others and moves to summon the court physician, only for him to desperately stop her. A loud crash echoes through the chamber, drawing an aide to the door. By the time the aide enters, Cyrus has forced himself upright, composed but pale. He firmly instructs Raphilia not to call a doctor, claiming it is merely exhaustion. The aide supports this explanation and urges Raphilia to return to her room, assuring her it is Cyrus's wish. Shaken, she complies, but her thoughts turn as she walks through the dark corridors. She has never seen him in such a state. In her first life, they shared a bed only twice before he told her not to come again. This is the third time in this timeline, an event she has no memory of. Her changed actions must have altered the course of events, leaving her in unfamiliar territory. Her worry deepens. Exhaustion alone cannot explain that seizure-like episode, or the glowing bruise. Does Cyrus suffer from a chronic illness? As she turns a corner, she encounters Lady Grace moving swiftly through the palace at that late hour. After a brief greeting, Grace continues on. Understanding dawns on Raphilia. Grace must have been summoned. She is likely the one Cyrus trusts in moments of weakness, the person privy to his secrets. Though the realization stings, Raphilia tells herself it is a relief that he has someone he can rely on. The next morning, determined to see him, Raphilia heads to his room with Lydia, who carries a heavy basket of fruit despite her mistress's protests. Lydia insists it is her duty to spare Raphilia any burden and expresses hope the refreshments will help Cyrus recover. At the door, they encounter Lady Grace exiting the chamber. Grace greets Raphilia politely and informs her that Cyrus is inside. Once Grace is out of earshot, Lydia's composure breaks. She recalls the rumors that circulated even before the marriage and fumes that such impropriety continues now that Raphilia is his lawful wife. Lydia trembles with anger on her mistress's behalf, unable to tolerate what she sees as blatant disregard for Raphilia's rightful position. Raphilia thanked Lydia for her loyalty and kindness, though she noticed her maid was still openly resentful toward Lady Grace. Lydia insisted that no matter how beloved Grace was as a saintess, Raphilia was the lawful wife and deserved proper respect. She argued that Lord Cyrus lacked awareness and that Grace had overstepped her place. Raphilia admitted quietly that such words once would have comforted her, because in the beginning every slight had wounded her deeply. Clutching her dress, she reminded herself that what truly mattered now was carrying out her plan carefully. She was determined to secure a peaceful divorce without anyone being harmed, so that Cyrus and Grace, along with herself, could pursue their own happiness without tragedy. Their conversation was interrupted when Cyrus appeared at the doorway, looking pale and exhausted. Raphilia and Lydia greeted him politely and inquired about his health, offering him a large basket of fruit. Cyrus rejected the gesture coldly, telling them to eat it themselves and announcing that he would be leaving the castle for a few days. As he turned away, he suddenly staggered. Raphilia instinctively reached out to steady him, but he reacted violently, shouting at her not to touch him. She froze in shock as he braced himself against the doorframe, clutching his chest in visible pain. Later, from a high window, Raphilia watched Cyrus and Lady Grace board a carriage together. Seeing them holding hands pierced her with a quiet ache. Lydia stood beside her, furious that Grace was allowed such closeness while Raphilia had been harshly pushed away. Raphilia tried to calm her maid, though inwardly she recognized how drastically Cyrus's attitude had shifted since falling ill. It seemed obvious to her that he was deliberately distancing himself. Though he had claimed he was leaving to recuperate, she could not ignore the appearance of a secret trust. Still, she reflected that she had grown accustomed to such departures. Cyrus and Grace had often spent time away from the castle together. Perhaps, she reasoned, they wished to cherish their moments alone, especially during difficult times. Determined to protect her heart, she resolved not to let his rejection wound her any further. Instead, Raphilia devoted herself to completing the mountain of paperwork Cyrus had assigned her. Several days later, Lydia informed her that Cyrus would soon return, having just finished the final document. Raphilia felt satisfied and decided to prepare herbal tea for him, assuming he would be exhausted. Lydia once again lamented that no wife could be as devoted as Raphilia and questioned how Cyrus could treat her so cruelly. Raphilia dismissed the praise lightly, though she remembered it was also time to begin other important preparations connected to her larger plan. When Cyrus returned to his office, he was stunned to find all the paperwork completed in only a few days. Among the documents, he discovered a note in Raphilia's handwriting welcoming him home and gently urging him to prioritize his health. He stood silently, staring at the message with an unreadable expression. Soon after, he searched for Raphilia but found her room empty. Unbeknownst to him, Lydia was helping her dress in an elaborate yellow gown adorned with a striking jeweled choker. Though Raphilia felt the attire was excessive, Lydia insisted she was simply enhancing her natural beauty. When Raphilia encountered Cyrus in the hallway, she greeted him warmly and asked about his condition with composed politeness. Later, they attended a garden tea party hosted by Queen Adelaide. The queen welcomed the assembled noblewomen and explained that she had obtained exceptionally rare sweets, which had inspired the gathering. She also used the occasion to formally introduce Raphilia as the wife of the second prince, Cyrus. With calm grace, Raphilia presented herself and expressed her hope to be remembered fondly. The guests praised her loveliness, while the queen redirected attention to the rare confections prepared for the event. Queen Adelaide informed the noblewomen that the tea sweets had been specially ordered from the Duchy of Luzerne, presenting them as a rare luxury. As Raphilia sipped her tea, she was struck by a deep sense of nostalgia. The atmosphere, the conversation, even the subtle tension. It all mirrored her previous life, with the only difference being Lydia's steady presence at her side. While the ladies chatted about their minor ailments, such as insomnia and persistent itching, Raphilia instinctively identified suitable herbal remedies in her mind, thinking that sage-grass tea could ease sleeplessness and that sap from the Ryanesca tree could soothe irritated skin. However, she firmly decided to remain silent. In her past life, revealing her knowledge of plants had led the queen to brand her as a plant expert. A label that was later twisted to cause her trouble and isolate her socially. Remembering that painful lesson, she chose caution over helpfulness. The queen soon observed that the tea had grown cold and used a magic circle to warm it, earning admiration and gratitude from the guests. She then proposed that, since everyone was gathered, they should take turns displaying their splendid abilities. Raphilia immediately recognized this as the beginning of the same spectacle that had once humiliated her. One by one, the noblewomen demonstrated their magical talents, levitating sugar cubes, conjuring delicate floral arrangements, and performing other elegant tricks. The queen praised each performance warmly before turning her attention to Raphilia, inviting her to entertain them as well. Memories of her previous failure resurfaced. In the past, she had been forced to apologize for having no special abilities to show, which sparked gossip among the nobles. They had mocked her as a non-ability user unworthy of marrying into royalty, and the queen had subtly encouraged the narrative to lower both Raphilia's and Cyrus's standing. This time, however, Raphilia was prepared. Signaling Lydia, she had a large case brought forward and revealed a violin, an unusual foreign instrument inherited from her father. Explaining that she had practiced it since childhood, she asked permission to perform. As soon as she began to play, the garden fell silent. The violin's tone was rich and moving, unlike anything the guests had heard before. The noblewomen were visibly captivated, some on the verge of tears. When she finished, applause and praise followed. While the guests expressed admiration and gratitude, the queen's composure subtly cracked. Though she maintained her smile, she gripped her fan and teacup tightly, her frustration barely concealed. One lady, deeply impressed, presented Raphaelia with a box of expensive wine as a token of thanks, suggesting she open it with Lord Cyrus on a special occasion. Raphaelia accepted graciously and offered to escort the guests to the porch. However, as she walked ahead, the queen secretly cast a spell, causing a thorny vine to trip her. Raphaelia fell with a startled cry. Lydia rushed to her side, and Raphaelia winced, explaining that she had twisted her ankle. At that moment, Lord Owen appeared, alarmed by the commotion, and demanded to know what had happened, while Lydia informed him that Raphaelia had been injured. Lord Owen immediately lifted Raphaelia into his arms, insisting she be taken to the infirmary at once. Though she protested that she was fine and mortified by the attention, Owen ignored her embarrassment and told her to hold on. As he carried her through the palace corridors, they suddenly encountered Lord Cyrus. Raphaelia was horrified that he was seeing her in such an undignified state. Cyrus's expression darkened as he demanded an explanation. Owen informed him that Raphaelia had injured her foot, but Cyrus cut him off sharply, questioning why Owen was the one carrying her. Owen explained that only women had been present when she fell, leaving him no choice, yet Cyrus curtly declared that he would take her instead. Before anyone could respond, Cyrus lifted Raphaelia over his shoulder in a fireman's carry and strode away, ordering an attendant to summon the court physician to her room. Owen and Lydia were left stunned by the prince's abrupt and forceful behavior. As Cyrus carried her, Raphaelia insisted she could walk on her own, but he remained unmoved. He pointed out that her resistance now differed greatly from how she had behaved with Owen and reminded her that he was her husband, the one she should rely on. When she attempted to explain, he pressed further, asking whether Owen was truly preferable to him. Raphaelia firmly denied such a claim. Once inside the room, Cyrus set her down but accused her of lacking awareness of her position as his wife. She argued that Owen had merely been helping her in an urgent situation, yet Cyrus countered that there had been no need for such physical closeness. His possessive tone confused Raphaelia, especially given his open relationship with Lady Grace. She reminded him that he had once insisted their marriage existed in name only and had even told her not to touch him. Flustered, Cyrus claimed that public appearances mattered, and that she should not allow another man to touch her in front of others. Raphaelia pointedly questioned the hypocrisy, asking whether appearances outweighed her injury, and whether anything was permissible so long as it happened in private. His irritated silence spoke volumes. Suddenly, Cyrus seized her wrist and pinned her onto the bed. Raphaelia gasped as he hovered inches above her, his intense gaze pulling her in despite herself. Her heart raced uncontrollably as he whispered her name with a conflicted expression. The charged moment was broken by a knock at the door. Lydia and Owen entered with the court physician, Dr. Maurice. Raphaelia quickly sat up, flustered and awkward. Lydia, protective as ever, politely but firmly requested that the prince refrain from any rough behavior toward the injured Raphaelia. Later, confined to her room, Raphaelia insisted on continuing her work despite Lydia's scolding. Lydia argued that she should rest properly, especially since Lord Kane, the chamberlain, had already redistributed her duties. Raphaelia admitted that the pain in her ankle had mostly subsided and that idleness unsettled her more than discomfort. Noticing a vase of rare white nebularis flowers, she learned they had come from the greenhouse gardener. The sight stirred a quiet longing. She wished she were allowed to enter the greenhouse again. Her thoughts drifted to Cyrus and his usual herbal tea, but recalling the earlier incident left her feeling awkward and conflicted. Her reflections were interrupted by a knock. Lord Kane entered, and Raphaelia greeted him calmly, handing over the completed documents to be delivered to Prince Cyrus, resuming her composed and dutiful role despite the turmoil beneath the surface. An aide asking about the condition of her injured leg. She reassured him that it had improved significantly and explained that she planned to begin walking more as part of her rehabilitation the next day. Relieved to hear this, the aide then delivered a message directly from Prince Cyrus, informing her that the prince wished to see her in his bedchamber that night. Later that evening, Raphaelia nervously entered Cyrus's room carrying a tray with a warm drink. Cyrus, dressed casually with the collar of his shirt open, accepted the tea and admitted he had been feeling thirsty. He mentioned that Kane had updated him about the assistance she had provided with his recent paperwork and expressed genuine gratitude. Raphaelia modestly downplayed her efforts, insisting she had only helped a little. Cyrus then remarked that he had heard her leg was healed and asked whether there was anything she wanted as a reward for her recovery. The request surprised Raphaelia, and she wondered whether it was meant as thanks for her help or perhaps an indirect apology for their earlier conflict. After thinking briefly, she made a simple request: the key to the greenhouse and permission to use a small patch of land inside it. Privately, she intended to grow herbs for Cyrus's tea, and eventually cultivate plants that could help create a cure for the plague she knew would appear in the future. Cyrus seemed puzzled by how modest the request was but granted it immediately, even promising to inform the gardener. Raphilia's face brightened with genuine excitement, and she thanked him enthusiastically. Seeing her happiness, Cyrus suddenly pulled her into a firm embrace. Flustered, Raphilia pointed out that they did not need to act like a loving couple when they were alone. Cyrus countered that she was his wife, and that gave him the right to touch her. Seizing the opportunity, Raphilia cleverly turned his reasoning back on him, arguing that if that were the case, she should have the same right as his wife. She reminded him how he had previously rejected her touch and admitted that his words had hurt her. She then insisted that if she had apologized for her own harshness, he should apologize as well. Caught off guard, Cyrus eventually admitted that he had been wrong. With a light smile, Raphilia declared that they were now even and suggested they consider the matter settled. Cyrus observed that she seemed very different from the quiet woman she had once been. Raphilia reflected inwardly that in her previous life she had tried desperately to behave like the perfect, obedient wife, yet none of that effort had changed her tragic fate. As the conversation faded, the atmosphere between them shifted. Cyrus moved closer, and Raphilia found herself overwhelmed by a kind of intimacy that had never existed between them before. The unfamiliar closeness left her flustered and unsure how to react. During the moment, however, Raphilia noticed something unusual. A bruise-like mark on Cyrus's shoulder glowing faintly with a rare blue-violet hue. Curious, she mentioned it without thinking. Almost immediately, Cyrus abruptly ended the moment, saying it was late and that they should sleep. He turned away, leaving Raphilia confused and wondering whether she had said something wrong, while the strange mark lingered in her thoughts. Raphilia sat at her desk reflecting on how different her life had become compared with her previous one. Back then, her days had felt empty, as if she were merely waiting for time to pass while being of little use to anyone. Now things felt strangely fulfilling. She had people she could speak with, responsibilities that kept her busy, and even her relationship with Cyrus had become stable enough that it no longer felt cold or distant. The change made her quietly grateful for the life she was living now. That night, as she lay in bed beside Cyrus, she realized that ever since their recent intimate moment he had not touched her again. While thinking about it, she shifted restlessly under the covers, which caught his attention. Cyrus asked whether her feet were cold, and when she admitted they were, he simply moved his own feet against hers to warm them. The small gesture surprised her. It was such a gentle and natural act that Raphilia felt a quiet warmth in her chest, realizing that despite everything, Cyrus could be unexpectedly kind. The following day she stood by a high window watching a carriage depart the castle courtyard. Inside were Cyrus and Lady Grace. Lydia informed her that the prince would likely be gone for several days again, suggesting it was probably another private getaway. Lydia, still unable to understand Cyrus's behavior, questioned why things were so complicated between them when it seemed they had recently been getting along. Raphilia answered calmly that marriage and feelings of the heart were not always the same thing. She insisted that she was genuinely happy with her life now and reminded Lydia that she and Cyrus were planning to divorce eventually. Because of that, she believed it was only right that both of them pursue their own happiness without resentment. Their conversation was interrupted when Owen burst in looking for Cyrus. When Raphilia explained that the prince had already left, Owen accidentally mentioned something about Cyrus's withdrawal period. Seeing her confusion, he quickly tried to correct himself and explained that Cyrus had suffered from a chronic condition for many years. According to him, the illness periodically worsened every few months, forcing Cyrus to leave the castle and recover elsewhere. Hearing this, Raphilia was startled to realize that Cyrus had been hiding a serious illness from her all this time. She immediately questioned why he would leave the castle to recover instead of staying under the care of the royal physician. Owen hesitated before admitting that Lady Grace was with him. Raphilia became uneasy, worrying that the herbal teas she had been preparing for Cyrus might actually be harmful if they conflicted with his condition. Determined to help properly, she asked Owen to tell her everything, explaining that as Cyrus's wife it was her duty to worry about his health and support him. Although Owen admitted that she had a point, he was reluctant to betray Cyrus's trust. Instead, he suggested she speak with someone who knew more, an old caretaker named Alf who had once looked after Cyrus. Believing Alf could explain the situation far better than he could, Owen wrote down the man's address in a quiet mountain area and handed it to her, mentioning that it should be a safe place to travel. Lydia offered to accompany her, but Raphilia refused. She felt that Cyrus clearly wanted to keep his condition secret and believed it would be better if she investigated quietly on her own. After a long carriage journey through the forest, she finally arrived at a secluded cottage deep in the mountains. Outside she encountered an elderly man carrying firewood, his long white hair and beard giving him a weathered appearance. As she spoke with him, Raphilia realized that the man seemed to be blind. Inside the cottage he offered her tea, and she politely introduced herself as Raphilia, asking if he was Alfred. The moment he heard her name, the old man froze in shock, his expression suddenly changing as if her identity meant far more than she expected. Alf leaned forward, his sightless eyes searching as he asked whether she was Raphilia Rattle. Raphilia confirmed that Rattle had been her maiden name, but she was puzzled about how the old man could possibly know her. Alf explained that her voice sounded strangely familiar to him. Because he could not see, he politely asked for permission to touch her face so he could confirm his suspicion. Though slightly hesitant, Raphilia allowed it. As his hands carefully traced her features, his expression shifted with sudden recognition. In a quiet, emotional voice he murmured that it truly was her. Leah. He seemed astonished that the woman who had married Cyrus was the same girl from long ago. Hearing the nickname startled Raphilia. Leah was something she had not heard in many years, and she struggled to remember where it had come from. Alf gently guided her memory, mentioning events from around 13 years earlier and asking whether she remembered a tall tower hidden deep inside the forest of mist. His words triggered a long-buried recollection. Raphilia remembered how, as a young girl, she had once wandered deep into the forest while collecting plants and became lost. In that unfamiliar place she had discovered a mysterious tower rising high above the trees. At first she thought she had imagined hearing someone call out, but then she clearly heard a boy's voice from a high window. Shortly afterward, Alf had appeared and approached her, surprised to find a child alone in such a dangerous area. With that memory returning, Raphilia suddenly realized that the man sitting before her was the same person she used to call the Tower Uncle. Alf confirmed this happily, saying there was no doubt now. The realization made more memories rush back. Back then, Alf had told her that a boy 3 years older than she was lived inside the tower. She recalled learning that the boy had noticed her wandering in the forest from the tower window and had asked Alf to check on her in case she was lost. After confirming she was safe, Alf had given her a map so she could find her way back to town. Grateful for the help, Raphilia had returned the next day using that same map. She had brought along a small bouquet of flowers she had made herself and a letter as a thank you for the boy she had never actually met. According to her memory, she had given the gifts to Alf, and while she waited nearby, a small basket tied to a rope was lowered from the top of the tower. Inside were beautiful stones along with a reply letter. She still remembered how excited and happy she had felt when she read it. The boy had signed his message with the simple name, Russ. After that encounter, Raphilia had begun visiting the tower often. Because she was not allowed inside and the structure was extremely tall, she and the boy never saw each other's faces or spoke directly. Instead, they exchanged letters through Alf. Through those messages she gradually learned more about him. That he could not leave the tower for certain reasons, that his mother had died years earlier, and that he spent most of his days alone and terribly bored. Despite the strange distance between them, the correspondence became one of the happiest parts of her childhood. However, Alf had insisted that neither of them reveal their true identities in the letters. Even so, the secret exchanges continued until her parents eventually discovered that she had been traveling deep into the forest and forbade her from going out again. That restriction ended the visits and slowly pushed the memories into the past. Back in the present, Raphilia looked down at her tea as the final realization formed in her mind. She remembered Alf suggesting long ago that she shorten her name to Lai, for their letters. If that was true, then the name, Russ, must have been the same kind of abbreviation. With sudden shock she understood the truth. Russ had been Cyrus all along. The discovery left her stunned, realizing that even in her previous life she had never learned that the lonely boy from the tower and the man she had married were the same person.